So, about a year ago, the US government kicked off this massive reset of its nutrition policy. I mean, it was a huge deal, a really bold attempt to tackle a health crisis that's been brewing for decades. Today, we're going to do a 1 year checkup and see what, if anything, has actually changed.
So, why the huge shift? Well, it really boils down to one number, and it's a number that's pretty tough to ignore. Over 70% of American adults are classified as either overweight or obese. The government didn't just call this a problem, they flat out called it a national health emergency.
And the government's answer was surprisingly simple. The new guidelines put out this vision that cut through all the noise. No more complex formulas or confusing jargon, just a clear, direct message. Let's get back to basics. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into why the rules had to change in the first place. Then we'll break down the new rulebook itself. After that, we'll give it a 1 year report card, look at the wins and the gaps, and finally, dig into the big conflict that's at the heart of this whole thing. Okay, so these new guidelines didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They were a direct response to a crisis that's been building for years, where our diet has basically become one of the main drivers of chronic disease in the country. And the stakes here are just massive. Think about this. Nearly 90 cents of every single dollar we spend on healthcare goes to treating chronic diseases, and so many of those are directly linked to what we eat. That staggering cost, both in money and just in people's well-being, is what finally pushed this big policy change. So, what was the big plan? How did these new rules actually tackle the problem? Well, the government's solution was basically a total reset. They wanted to move away from all the complex calorie counting and instead put a simple focus on the quality of the food we're eating. Basically, the new rulebook comes down to these key ideas. It's a call to build our meals from whole, nutrient-packed foods. Proteins, dairy, fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, and whole grains. And at the same time, to really try and limit all that processed stuff that's kind of taken over. So this is what it's supposed to look like in real life. Meals built around actual recognizable ingredients. Things like grilled chicken, fresh veggies, fruit. It's about shifting away from eating out of a box and getting back to food in its most natural state. And on the flip side, this is what they're trying to get us away from. The policy is taking direct aim at these highly processed foods, the sodas, the chips, the cookies, the fast food, all the things packed with added sugars and weird chemical additives. The message is pretty clear. This stuff should be a sometimes food, not an everyday food. And they got really specific with one thing in particular: sugar. Instead of some vague daily percentage that's hard to track, the new guidelines brought in a hard and fast rule: no more than 10 grams of added sugar per meal. That makes it a whole lot easier for people to actually follow. So, okay, the government gave us a whole new playbook. But here's the big question, right? After a full year, has it actually changed how America eats? Let's take a look at the results. To figure that out, we're going to look at an analysis from Dr. Michael Fenster. He's a cardiologist and also a professional chef, and he put together this 1 year scorecard on the whole Make America Healthy Again movement. And that first year was, well, it was a whirlwind. It kicked off with setting up the official commission, then came a bunch of assessments and strategies, and it all led up to the release of those new guidelines we were just talking about. So a lot of action for sure. But what about the impact? Now, Dr. Fenster's analysis really gets into the nitty-gritty of what worked and, maybe more importantly, where the big gaps are. And this is where we start to see the real-world challenges pop up. And right away, he points out a huge, glaring problem. The entire movement is about cutting back on ultra-processed foods, or UPFs. But, get this, nowhere in any of the official documents do they actually give a clear definition of what a UPF is. And that creates a massive headache for actually putting this into practice. And this isn't just a technicality, it has real-world consequences. For instance, states in the SNAP program can restrict buying unhealthy foods, but without a clear federal definition of what that means, every state is just making up its own rules. You end up with this confusing, inconsistent mess across the country. And, even the things that look like a win, they have a catch. Taking steps to phase out synthetic food dyes like Red No 40, that's a visible, positive step. But it's also a really narrow one. A whole bunch of other additives and emulsifiers that have been linked to health issues, they're still totally allowed. Which really brings us to the core issue with this whole thing. There's this huge disconnect between the government telling people what to do and actually showing them how to do it.
Dr. Fenster really puts it best when he says this. The policy is great at setting a goal, eat real food, cut back on sugar, but it gives people zero directions on how to actually get there, especially when you're dealing with tight budgets, busy schedules, and a culture that's built on convenience.
And that's really the heart of the problem, isn't it? Just giving people information doesn't change what they do. Real, lasting change happens when people learn new skills, how to shop smarter, how to cook, how to make easy substitutions. Without that practical, hands-on support, even the best rules in the world can just fall flat.
So after all that, what's the final score? The one-year grade. Dr. Fenster gives the whole Make America Healthy Again initiative a 6 out of 10. So, it's passing, but there is a lot of room for improvement. So to break it down, on the plus side, it absolutely set a new agenda. It took some concrete actions that showed the government was serious. But on the negative side, failing to define key terms, that huge gap in how to actually do it, and the very narrow scope of the wins, it all shows there's still a really long way to go. And that leaves us with this really big, important question. The government has done a good job of changing the conversation about what healthy eating looks like. But if they aren't providing the how, who is? Who's going to fill that gap and help turn this policy into something people can actually practice in their daily lives? That right there is the biggest challenge for your